Hi, I'm Johnny Kincaid. Thanks for joining us for Love Evansville. This is a podcast that's dedicated to loving our community to Christ. Now, this week we're going to do something a little bit different because it is, after all, the 4th of July week, so we're going to do our patriotic thing this week on the show. Later on, we're going to be joined by Sean Selby. He's with a great local Christian group called Restoring Our Heritage. We'll learn more from Sean a little bit later on. But first, I want to give you an update on the Great American Flag. This is the giant flag that was made at Anchor Industries back in 1980. The flag has been kind of passed around and everything, but most people have lost track of where it is, and I still hear from people who want more information on the Great American Flag. Now, I wrote about some of it in my book, The Great American Flag, that's available on Amazon right now. Shameless plug, got to put those in there every now and then. But I wanted to get a hold of the guys who are now working on restoring that flag and bringing it back to its glory. So we have A.J. Rayberg and Josh Dorfman joining us on the podcast today. So I want to set the scene for you here. It was 2001, July 4th. A guy named Ted Dorfman in Pennsylvania is sitting at home. He's been left alone by his wife and his kid, and he's sitting there flipping through the TV channels, and he runs across an auction on the History Channel to auction off what had been, at the time, the world's largest flag. And he can't resist, so he goes in and he goes ahead and he puts in a bid, and he winds up buying the flag for $12,500. Ships it out to him in Pennsylvania. So that's where we want to start off with our conversation. First of all, with Ted's son, Josh. Josh, what was it like at home when your mom came home and discovered that your dad had spent almost over $12,000 on a flag?
So I was sent upstairs for them to sort things out between the two of them. In my recollection, I was 8 when it happened, so I'm probably not remembering everything particularly clearly. I think at first there was a little bit of shock and surprise, like, what do you mean you bought a 2.5-acre flag? What on earth are we going to do with it? And my dad didn't really have a good answer to that question. But as she took some time just to wrap her head around it, and she realized the history and how special it was, she also became pretty excited about it. And by the time the next day rolled around, there was definitely some enthusiasm in the household about what this meant and what they wanted to do around it. But it was definitely not what she was expecting to come home to on that day.
All right, so the flag was purchased 4th of July, 2001. It shipped out to Pennsylvania. Just a couple of months later, we wind up with 9/11 taking place, and it turns out that the Dorfmans lived not too far from where Flight 93 crashed. So they took the flag out for a big display, and Josh, what was that display like?
My recollection of the day, and I got to skip school, so I was pretty excited to see what was going on. It was a serious operation. They had dozens and dozens of volunteers who had come out that day to assist. There were cranes that were donated. Obviously, the Speedway was very receptive to let us use their field, and it took the better part of several days for the entire event to get laid out, because there was a stage for singing, and I didn't quite wrap my head around at 8 years old what all of that work entailed, but there was such a volunteer aspect. So many people wanted to come out and not only give their time but donate. So like you mentioned, the helicopter that was flying over as well to help dry it out afterwards. There was such a strong sense of patriotism that had come out in those 2 weeks that everyone came together to work as a team to get it up, which is, I think, required for us to do that moving forward.
All right, AJ, I want to know what brought you into this whole deal.
Well, Josh and I have been playing hockey together for a number of years, and we were kind of sitting at the bar after a hockey game, talking about stupid impulse purchases on eBay, and Josh kind of goes, well, I got one that'll take the cake, and starts to tell the story of how his dad on the 4th of July 2001 came to own a 2-acre flag. So I think we all agreed that definitely won and took the cake for the at least the most interesting impulse buy.
So tell me, what would you like to see done with the flag?
I mean, I think our end objective is really what I think everyone who's been involved in the flag since its creation wants to see, just wants to have a sense of permanence. This flag is truly something special. We like to say it may not be the largest American flag anymore, but it's certainly the most American flag out there. With all the time and effort that has gone into this, all the way from the people at Anchor Industries and everyone that donated either expertise or materials to put this together. Len Silver, fine. I mean, just there are hundreds of patriots that have dedicated a lot of themselves to this flag, and we just want to hopefully get to the point where it can have that final sense of permanence somewhere.
So the flag is still sitting in its original trailer?
That's correct. So we have some pictures to share with you, Johnny, that really just display how large and powerful this flag is. It's sitting on just some normal asphalt, and over the course of 18 years, the trailer has crushed the asphalt and has actually sunk into the parking lot it's sitting in. So it is the original trailer, but it is the original trailer is not in functioning shape at this point.
So Josh, are you guys looking for a permanent home for the flag? Is that the idea?
That's a very good question, because not only does it, we believe that storing it indoors would probably be most conducive to allowing it to stay in good shape. And there aren't a lot of places that have a 2.5 acre indoor facility. So we're hoping that there might be a partnership. So one thing I remember my dad saying as I was growing up is that we don't feel it's enough of an attraction by itself just to stand alone and be the main attraction for an entire city. But we feel a partnership where it might be alongside of another event. Those two together might be able to create a symbiotic relationship where this thing could have its permanence. We believe that's several years out, and we think that taking it on a road show here to attract attention and get it back to the fame that it deserves is probably where we're going to start. But in a perfect world, if we can find an indoor facility partnered with another patriotic movement, that would be ideal. AJ, any thoughts to add on that?
Yeah, I think, and Johnny, from everything you know about researching the flag, it's kind of our hope that this does kind of take on a life of its own. When we started talking about this and thinking about it, and I truly came to understand, what this thing was that Ted had decided to purchase on the 4th of July. When we first went and took a look at it, we knew something needed to be done, and so that was our initial motivation: is let's get it out, let's make sure it's is in good condition, and if repairs or anything need to be made, to have an assessment of those, and then hopefully, once that happens, we can have a better sense of what the next steps are. But this is the only way that you tackle a project like a 2 acre, 7 ton flag, is to kind of take bite-sized chunks of it and keep the momentum going. Well, and Johnny, I think, in a perfect world, I think Evansville is where the flag belongs. I mean, it still means something to the community, and I think that if in a perfect world, if there was a way to find a permanent home for it in Evansville, that would certainly be top on our list of places to do that.
What we've observed, Johnny, is that the flag has been in vogue at certain points of time, right? It's gotten its main use when patriotism is popular. And what we've also observed, and largely from your work, is that the people of Evansville have cherished it every single year since its creation, and that connection to them is special. And we'd love to make sure that community especially with the great people at Anchor and all of the other organizations that chipped into its creation, that they're able to enjoy it every bit as much as everyone else.
All right, and you've put together a website. Give us the website address.
Greatflag.org, or greatamericanflag.org. We bought both. We're not sure which one's catchier.
Great. Thank you guys very much. Appreciate your time here today.
Great. Appreciate it, Johnny.
Thank you, Johnny. Yeah,
likewise. Happy
Happy 4th of July.
And now joining us live and in person, it's Sean Selby with Restoring Our Heritage. How you doing, Sean?
Hey, good, Johnny. How about yourself?
I'm doing great.
Great.
Yeah. Glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you.
This is our 4th of July edition of our podcast, and that's the whole reason why you're here. We spent a little time talking about Great American Flag.
I feel uniquely honored then for that to be brought in on a 4th of July special.
Yeah.
It's a real privilege. Well, to be here with you alone, so that's exciting,
man.
Johnny.
Yeah.
And just especially as after I just told you, we a local restaurant happened to see the picture of the flag, and you'd done such great work on that, and to have you be a community activist to really letting people know what's going on. It's exciting. So thanks for inviting me.
And the cool thing on the flag is that we're exploring possibilities to get it back out.
That's great.
That's the exciting part. Yeah.
Wow.
So
that's worth exploring.
Yeah. The current owners don't want it to sit in that trailer any longer.
Sure. Yeah. Well, good. That's exciting. Well, it's neat to see you out and about in the community and your influence in that way. So
thanks.
Exciting. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. I'm always trying to stir something up.
That's
somewhere.
right. That's right. That's a good problem to have. Right?
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. So, Restoring Our Heritage. Let's just talk a little bit about the background of Restoring Our Heritage to start with.
Well, in 2001, there were a number of individuals who said, we really need to remember our history because it's at that point in time, of course, as it was even closer. And as we've talked about, we're only talking about really 3 lifespans away from us.
Yeah.
And when you put that in perspective, and like I told you, the aspect of that of being really is so much closer to us, and that tangibility and the applicability for our daily lives, and even just like I said, we were having that discussion with debates yesterday, and it didn't come up as often a conversation as I'd like because the Constitution really should be the guiding principle upon which the governance is happening. But anyway, that notwithstanding, back in 2001, even at that stage, and one of the people who was involved in it became ultimately the president was my dad, Dr. Selby, right. And so and he's still president today, and we have an active board, and we continue to promote that message that the Christian heritage of this country is important to know, and especially for people in the schooling stage of their lives. We've been in multiple different schools throughout the tri-state region, ranging from Henderson, even in Kentucky, to all the way up to Princeton and Vincennes. So, in the past, and had many different speakers from out of town. So it's been an exciting experience to be a part of.
This is a huge debate too.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You're talking about the political debate? That's, or just in general? That whole concept? In general,
the whole concept of the Christian heritage of our country is just a gigantic debate.
Oh, yeah.
But in today's world, with with the election going on now and the candidates,
right?
You see distinct differences in how the Constitution is viewed.
Yeah.
When you look at different folks that are running.
Absolutely, and I mean, you really nailed it, because that is what we're dealing with, is being able to have a conversation that people can relate about on a number of different topics. And just as I saw a sermon preached the other day talking about the relatability about Old Testament verses and how that applies to daily life, it's hard to make that distinction as far as why Paul would say certain things, even in the New Testament, to our daily lives. How we really apply that? And the preacher actually used 9/11 as an example. That wouldn't have any applicability to certain entire swaths and communities of people, but it would to us in our daily routine today. So you're really nailing it when you say we really have to have that relatability.
It's a discussion that we really need to have, because it's not just about whether we lay claim to Christian heritage, right? Because that can be argued, and it has been argued, and the faith of the forefathers, everybody has a different argument on that.
Absolutely.
But it's how we interpret that document that is really crucial.
That, and also there's really not any debating when Thomas Jefferson, 2 days after writing the concept of the wall of separation of church and state, that he was actually in a government facility listening to a preacher that had been invited in and was preaching the Word of God. It wasn't multiple different. There were specific examples that we can, and we talk about David McCullough's book 1776 and the Battle of Long Island, which is a wonderful example of the providence that you really can't escape if you're an atheist or an agnostic person, and that is difficult for them to really lay claim to the idea that there's not an overruling providence when you have a fog and basically no wind for the ships, and General Howe deciding to break for tea, different things like that happening that really are hard to imagine, but pride comes before the fall in that case, so, but yeah, there's definitely.
And for those who haven't read the book, this is such an incredible story.
Right.
And it's very well documented is the thing. I mean, so we're not just talking about one person plucked the story out of the air.
Right.
This is very, very well documented that Washington's troops, they had their back up against the wall, or more specifically up against the river.
Yeah. And
the British troops were advancing, and there was nowhere for the American soldiers to go.
Right.
And in rolls this dense fog.
Right.
And it allows enough cover that the British can't see, even if with British ships out there, and they couldn't see this retreat then that the Americans were able to execute via water.
Right.
And they got in rowboats and they got away.
Yeah, that's right.
And after they got away, the fog lifted.
Exactly. And then you combine, and it's even the fact that they had 400 troops on the American side, and of course it was about 19,000 total to the 32,000 the British had overall. So General Howe could have crushed the resistance right then and there. We would have no United States of America as we know it today.
Right.
We'd be under some level of subjugation. But what was amazing is the 400 troops happened to hold them at a pass when they tried to break away and surround them, and they weren't able to do that. Then they were also obviously able to escape, but they were also the ships were not able to sail. I mean, and there's a lot of incidences in American history like that. You have the numerous bullet holes going through George Washington's cloak and a battle, and I can't pronounce it right at the moment, but Nahangala, I think. But anyway, so that there's just so many different instances that prove, and the two horses shot out from under him, and I believe it's 4 bullet holes through his cloak. So those things are hard to refute when you are not struck, and then you have later stories, and we've tried to pin the timeline down, and one of the things we've done in Restoring Our Heritage is try to get those different aspects of it really pinned down to exact dates, and we haven't been able to yet, but that battle where Washington was shot out from under, but there was stories of elders coming up to him saying that he wanted to meet the guy who could not be killed, that the Great Spirit was protecting. Well, I mean, again, atheists are going to have a hard time explaining these situations away, aren't they, Johnny?
That's true.
So,
and anybody who has not read 1776, really, you owe it to yourself to check this book out. And if you're, I always hear from people, well, I'm just not a reader. Then get the audio version and listen to it, because it's truly good stuff.
Absolutely.
And in order for us to have an intelligent conversation about the subject, we really have to educate ourselves some to begin with anyway.
Right?
So I'm going to pull you back into the deep end of the pool for a second here,
let's go.
Because you jumped in and then you jumped back out again.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
The whole issue of separation of church and state, this is really the deep end of the pool.
Right.
Because this is the argument that comes up more than any other argument that we hear.
Right.
And what we have to understand is, first of all, people will say the words, well, it's the separation clause in the Constitution, and nothing in the the word separation isn't there. Right.
Absolutely.
In fact, the wording, and back in the bar betting days, right?
Sure.
You could actually whip out your Constitution and go, okay, find it for me in
That's
there.
right.
And if you can't find it, you got to buy me the next round.
That's right.
But
Yeah, or an average federal farmer, that gives. Yeah, that's right.
But because the thing of it is, what it actually says is that Congress will not make any laws regarding your expression of religion.
Right.
That's what it says.
Right.
That's not word for word, but that's what's there.
And Johnny, take it even a further step, and that First Amendment was supposed to be applied to what? The federal government, a prohibition.
Right.
Because the founders knew that the thing that would basically break away, get escape velocity going downhill in a snowball scenario, that we know we've seen runaway scenarios like that before, that would be the federal government basically taking those rights away from the people. And
our forefathers
they
are saying,
knew
we want
restrict
government to stay
the federal
out of
government.
religion.
And in fact, they specifically said, and let's take it another step, Congress shall make no law.
Right.
Now, does that mean that the Supreme Court, if we have this extrajudicial concept in our minds that the Supreme Court has the wherewithal and the ability to rule in these matters way beyond the confines of what the original intent was? Do we believe that means that they're allowed to restrict the free speech? See, now you get into really big concepts.
Right. But when you get... But if you strip back to the purpose of the Supreme Court,
Yep.
they're there to determine whether a law that's been passed by Congress is constitutional or not. So in theory, now, over the past many decades,
Right.
this has not been the case for our Supreme Court. They keep legislating from the bench. But
and can we think of modern examples where we have maybe genocidal level circumstances that the Supreme Court may have been involved in, like in 1972, for example, Roe versus Wade, where the person who said that they had this concern have actually recanted their story, and now we still, year after year, have millions of people who are caught up in that. So you can see the value of, even in that scenario, the founders saying this was supposed to be restricted. I mean, Thomas Jefferson, who was, we just found, and you'd think, being that it's 3 lifespans, as we've talked about back in the history, that we wouldn't find anything new, but we just found a new letter that Thomas Jefferson had written in 1825, I believe, the last year, I believe that was the right year that he was alive, to someone who was at the Battle of Bunker Hill. It actually was found by the grandson of somebody who was a hero there. So, we're finding new things from the founders all the time. So this is still makes it a really important conversation for us to continue having. A lot of people think, well, it's settled, it's settled law, it's settled this. Well, we're still finding new things all the time.
And the fact that particular clause stems from a founding father. Right? It's not that they found a consensus among...
It's not in the Federalist Papers, Johnny.
The whole idea of separation of church and state, there would be no question of it had all of the founding fathers or the majority of the founding fathers made that statement.
Right.
But it was made by one person, and it wasn't even in reference to the church being involved in government. It was in reference to the government not interfering in church affairs.
And I'm so glad you said that, because that was the point I was going to make. And so I don't even have to make it now. So we can go home, right? You must be really well versed in this, Johnny. Basically, because it was a one-way valve, if it wasn't a one-way valve, then we would not find Thomas Jefferson 2 days later, after writing the Danbury Baptist letter about the wall of separation in church and state, we would not find him listening at the pulpit that was there in the United States. I believe the Treasury Department. It was either I think it's the Treasury. The Treasury, multiple different offices actually held church services, and I think it might have even been the Capitol building itself. So
in those days, they had church services in the Capitol, in the Supreme Court building,
the Supreme Court building,
and in other federal buildings as well.
I think the Treasury might have been the third one. Yeah, and I don't remember. I think that one might have been in the Capitol building. Yeah. So wouldn't he have had a problem and not been there the 2 days later after that, if he thought the separation of church and state applied to the federal government? So that's something they want to, people on certain political aisles want to escape from.
Right.
They really don't like that concept. That the man that they have elevated to this position, that they believe is a deist, that he did all these things that they want to erect monuments about, actually believed in an overall, obviously was willing to listen to church service there in the Capitol building. So obviously he would not have attended it personally if he had a problem with it, if he didn't shut it down, being president. So, it's really important to keep that in mind.
And there are those who like to just kind of point at every one of the founding fathers going, he's a deist, he's a deist,
yes, that's right. And then you look at Franklin, who they really love to point to, and he talked about, I have lived, sir, a long enough time to know the convincing proofs that God governs in the affairs of men. He gave that appeal to have prayer in the United States Congress. So they ultimately did not do that. However, he made it a very strong appeal for it. So that's hard for me to imagine he'd be a deist, saying that if he believes that God intervenes and rules in the affairs of men, if he cannot, if a sparrow falls without his notice, an empire cannot ride without his aid. Those are quotes from him. So, I think you're onto something there, Johnny.
Yeah.
So
just like I've heard the arguments that Washington was a deist too, and those make me actually do a spit take when that comes out.
That's
because, it's kind of like,
now you're really when you talk about Providence is one of his. I mean, that was one of his go-tos. So that's hard for me to imagine.
So we can acknowledge, at least with some people wanting to argue the point, but we can acknowledge this concept that our forefathers had God in mind,
right?
And they referenced God in the written documents,
right?
So there really isn't any more proof needed than that, and I guess where we get into muddy water is when people start taking this really broad interpretation of those documents,
right?
And it's kind of like, if they meant that, I think they would have wrote that.
Yeah.
But separation of church and state is the perfect example. They meant to keep government out of church affairs, nothing more, nothing less. That's what they stated.
Well, but then you take away their ability to find the emanations of the penumbras, as they like to say in the court cases, on a certain political spectrum, that they can try to grab the meanings out of thin air, for their own purposes. If we take that away from them, that would be just horrible, wouldn't it? That they have to actually abide by the written intent of the founders. So that's what we struggle with on a regular basis. I mean, it's a very important topic, and a critical topic to our daily lives, that we have such a large swath of the American population that are, and they're great candidates for. You talk about who's would be interested in these topics. Well, anybody who is interested in anything of a historical context, and especially their citizenship within our country, these are really important topics, and the way that the underpinnings happen with the constitutionality argument that you bring up, they're really important. So that's why me, as a millennial, and don't go running around saying that to everybody, right? That I'm a millennial, but I'm barely in that category. I'm in that kind of strange category, Johnny, where it's 77 to 83. That Star Wars, they call it generation or whatever, but. That our generation really should take this seriously, because even though it is 3 lifespans away, it really is just 3 lifespans away.
Yeah.
So
when you take our history and kind of condense it to think in those kinds of terms, of generational terms,
right?
And today things move at such a rapid pace that we see generations turn over very quickly.
Right.
It's from Gen X to the millennials. It's all just kind of rapid succession.
Well, and they're renaming them all the time. So as you can tell, I'm not confused exactly which generation I fall into, but I know I'm a millennial. I know that much. So, but
when we then take that and we go look at the overall history of our country, and the amazing thing that you see as a thread in this country is that the exact right person with the exact right inspiration for our country came along at the exact right time.
Oh yeah.
And it's like you have to look at some of those things and go, that's got to be God's plan.
Right.
I mean, and it starts with the founding fathers.
Yep.
But it goes to Abraham
I'd even say
Lincoln.
It goes even further back.
Yes. Oh.
Leads into, I think the pinnacle moment is and you can almost see, we don't know what God's overall plan is, and but you can see it from the Mayflower. You can see that there was an intent there by people from multiple generations. I mean, we're talking about even more years than from us to the founding going back. I mean, it definitely, and it leads into other different things start to happen. Obviously, you talk about the Civil War,
right,
where it gets complicated,
right.
But for when we go back, we definitely can see this hand of protection because they were really serious about. I mean, whether it's the governors of the Plymouth colony, Bradford, and all the different people leading into the ultimate founding, you can see there was like a projection there.
Right.
Whether or not we have gone off the track or whether we eventually will, I just don't see that a socialist country could be, if that's what some people want it to be, could be something that was the enlightened, providential, protected, Bible, believing culture that the people in the Plymouth colony, and on the Mayflower, and those people that were involved in that would say that this is something, and that's something I've thought about lately too. Is that how could they imagine that would be something that we aspire to as something that is really not biblical,
right?
Basically taken from Peter to pay Paul, but using a gun at Peter's head. That'd be a different. I'd like to see someone sell that to someone at at Plymouth Colony or Jamestown. That eventually, hey, by the way, in about 400 or 500 years, this country is going to say your labor needs to go to pay for someone else, and they didn't do any of the work. And you look at the biblical tenets and how that's prescribed over time, so that would be hard. That would be a hard sell, wouldn't it, John? You hate to be in that position to have to sell that to those folks, wouldn't it?
It really would be a hard sell, absolutely. But as we just look at this progression, you can see from Plymouth to the founding fathers. You go ahead a couple of more generations and you look at Abraham Lincoln as president of the United States, and you have to stop and ponder, could anybody else? This is a guy who was inept as a commander in the military. I mean, he could not get men to follow him. Right. As a captain.
It becomes very complicated, I'll be honest with you, because you have some of the most talented people going and fighting for the South.
Yes.
You have Robert E. Lee, and of course now their statues are being toppled in the South, and that's a whole other conversation too, and it brings forward the fact that my generation, I guess, thinks that it's going to be a smart decision for us to start taking statues of heroes of that day, of that era, because they did something slightly off. And I mean, it's becoming to the degree now, they're talking about Thomas Jefferson. I forget which university it is, but this is a more recent story too, that they're going to start reevaluating whether or not he can stay, in any way. I mean, so no one, either the author of the Declaration of Independence is going to get caught up in this, and it's kind of what we predicted. They would go after George Washington, which they have. They've already. I've been in Falls Church in Virginia, where his George Washington's church is. They've actually, taken him off the wall there at their own church. So it is. This is a serious conversation because now we've lost track of it to that degree. But yeah, the Civil War gets real tricky because of you have so many talented people on both sides.
Right.
Of that battle.
But if you take the key leadership position, and the what I see as God-given wisdom, that Lincoln had, because he hired his adversaries to work in his cabinet, which was incredibly wise. And then you leap forward then into another crucial time in American history, into World War II, and you look at Dwight Eisenhower, probably gets less credit than what he deserves. But if you can imagine, we recently commemorated the anniversary of D-Day. Can you imagine, though, Eisenhower standing on the cliffs looking out over the channel as these ships after ship load of men is heading toward Normandy Beach, and he knows,
Right.
he absolutely knows what the cost is going to be in human life.
yeah.
They sat down and calculated that out.
Sure.
They knew how many thousands of people were going to die
Right.
just in the process of trying to take that beach.
Oh,
But
yeah.
he knew that it was what absolutely had to happen. And I can't
Right.
imagine anybody being able to make that kind of decision
Oh, I can't even.
unless the hand of God is on their shoulder, leading them with divine providence.
Well, and then you're proven right, because FDR thought it so important that he took time to recite and to talk about biblical passages, and I think the same thing happened with Abraham Lincoln. The weight, the volume of weight, the magnanimity of that situation was so much for one individual to bear that you can see in the Gettysburg Address with Abraham Lincoln. You can see with FDR reciting biblical passages. You can see that, and again, that goes to the fact that, again, they're not going to multiple texts, they're going back to one text pretty consistently within our history.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people don't really like that, but that is the truth. And so even as recent as within a lifespan, as we see with FDR, as you point out, I mean, here's a president basically, and that's someone that's, you talk about Eisenhower and FDR, we're talking about both sides of the political spectrum at that era. So, it was a very important aspect of it, and it was obviously what they went back to was the overruling providence. And it's unfortunate so many people had to die, as you say, and to have that weight of that decision as president, boy, that would be something else.
That would be really rough.
Yeah.
This has really been fun, man. I'm
great.
I'm a history nerd,
Me
so
too.
I just kind of get.
I know we could probably do this for a few days if we didn't have a time to stop, right?
Exactly. We'll go live and we'll stay on till we fall
Yeah, that's
asleep.
right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
But this has been a blast. I
Good.
appreciate you coming in, and
It's been a privilege.
it's a little departure from what we would normally do on Love Evansville, but by the same token, it's so important that we learn these things, that we understand
Right.
our history, and that we teach it from generation to generation.
Right.
We can't rely on the education system to pass the stories down.
If we did, we'd be in a lot of trouble, Johnny.
Exactly.
And so that's why you're right, because that's why we've actually gone to schools and done those things in the past and been willing to address that and bring speakers in and be there. So because you're right, we can't rely on the schools to do it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here with us,
Yeah.
Sean. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
And thank you for tuning in to Love Evansville. Join us again next week.